Avoidance doesn't come from not knowing what to do. It comes from a loop your body learned before logic ever got involved. If you watched the last video, you already understand something most adults never name: avoidance isn't a character flaw. It's a learned response. You're not stuck because you don't know what to do. You're stuck because your body learned when not to do it. And once that loop is learned, logic is always late to the conversation. You can see the problem clearly. You can understand the cost. You can even want to change. And still freeze the moment a real decision shows up. That's not contradiction. That's conditioning. In the last video, you saw the tax you've been paying, how small acts of avoidance quietly drain focus, energy, and leverage. But today we have to go deeper. Because avoidance doesn't live in your habits. It lives in the loop that trained them. A loop that links money, uncertainty, and threat, long before you ever formed an opinion about finances. This is why telling yourself to be disciplined doesn't work. Why awareness alone doesn't stick. Why you relapse into waiting even after you know better. Your body isn't resisting progress. It's protecting you from something it learned to associate with danger. And until you see how that association was built, every new strategy will feel heavier than it should. Today, we're not fixing anything yet. We're not breaking the habit. We're exposing the loop. Because once you can see the loop clearly, it stops running you automatically. And that's where real change actually begins. Avoidance doesn't begin with a bad habit. It begins with a moment. A moment where uncertainty meets your nervous system before your thinking mind gets involved. For most people, that moment happened quietly. Not during a crisis. Not during a failure. But during pressure. A bill that felt heavier than expected. A conversation where money felt exposed. A situation where the margin was thin and the stakes felt personal. In that moment, your body learned something simple: this doesn't feel safe. And the body doesn't need a spreadsheet to learn. It only needs sensation. Tension. Tightness. Urgency. Shame. Fear of getting it wrong. When those sensations show up together, the nervous system doesn't analyze. It associates. Money becomes linked to threat. Uncertainty becomes linked to danger. Decision-making becomes linked to exposure. That's the first connection. Then comes the second. In that same moment, you likely did something that reduced the discomfort. You checked a number. You delayed a decision. You avoided the conversation. You told yourself, "I'll deal with this later." And something important happened. The tension dropped. Not because the situation improved, but because the pressure stopped for now. Your body registered relief. And relief is how learning locks in. So the loop forms, uncertainty appears. The body tenses. Avoidance reduces the tension. That reduction gets rewarded. Not consciously. Biologically. Your nervous system learns, avoidance equals safety. From that point on, logic becomes secondary. Because the body now has a pattern. The next time money demands attention, your system doesn't ask, "What's the smartest move?" It asks, "How do I get out of this feeling?" That's why avoidance feels automatic. Because it is. It's not a decision. It's a reflex. And over time, the loop strengthens. Each avoided decision teaches the body that delay works. Each postponed choice reinforces the association between action and danger. Until eventually, even thinking about deciding triggers the response. That's when people say, "I know what I should do. I just can't make myself do it." Nothing is wrong with them. They're not lazy. They're not undisciplined. They're not weak. They're responding exactly as a trained nervous system would. This is why awareness alone doesn't break the loop. Because the loop wasn't created by ignorance. It was created by relief. And relief is far more powerful than insight. Until the body learns a new association, one where decisions don't equal danger, avoidance will keep resurfacing. No matter how smart you are. No matter how much you know. No matter how motivated you feel. This is the machinery underneath the habit. And once you see it clearly, you stop blaming yourself for the symptom. And start targeting the system that created it. That's where we go next. Most people believe awareness is the breakthrough. They think that once they understand what's happening, the behavior will naturally change. That belief is wrong. Awareness does not interrupt the avoidance loop. In many cases, it strengthens it. Here's why. Awareness happens in the mind. The loop lives in the body. So when awareness arrives without a new internal structure, it doesn't create freedom. It creates pressure. You now see the pattern. You know the cost. You recognize the avoidance. You understand what's happening. But your nervous system hasn't learned anything new yet. So instead of relief, awareness adds weight. Every delayed decision now carries judgment. Every moment of waiting feels louder. Every familiar avoidance behavior feels exposed. Not because you're failing, but because you removed ignorance without removing threat. And threat doesn't dissolve just because you name it. In fact, for the nervous system, awareness can feel like danger. Because awareness removes ambiguity. Before, avoidance was automatic. Now it's conscious. And consciousness without capacity feels like pressure. This is the moment most people misinterpret as regression. They say things like, I know what's happening now, but I feel worse. I understand myself better, but I'm still stuck. Why didn't awareness fix this? Because awareness didn't change where decisions come from. It only removed your ability to pretend. And when the body still believes decisions are dangerous, clarity becomes another stressor. Here's the paradox most people never see. Awareness increases responsibility before it increases safety. You now feel responsible to act, but your nervous system still associates action with threat. So the system does what it always does under threat. It seeks relief. And the fastest relief available is the old pattern. Waiting. Monitoring. Overthinking. Delaying one more time. This is why people relapse after breakthroughs. Not because awareness failed, but because it arrived too early, without support. From the body's perspective, the situation actually got worse. Before, you felt tension, but didn't know why. Now, you feel tension and self-awareness. That combination is heavier. So avoidance returns, not as ignorance, but as self-protection. This is also why advice becomes unbearable at this stage. Advice assumes capacity. Awareness hasn't built it yet. So suggestions feel overwhelming. Frameworks feel demanding. Action feels risky. Not because the advice is wrong, but because it's being received from the same threatened internal state. This is where people start blaming themselves again. I must not want it badly enough. I understand everything, so why am I still not moving? Something must be wrong with me. Nothing is wrong. You simply moved awareness forward without moving your decision-making environment. And here's the key insight. Awareness does not dissolve avoidance. It exposes it. And exposure without margin triggers the very loop you're trying to escape. That's why awareness alone never creates lasting change. It needs somewhere safe to land. A different internal position. A different layer to decide from. Until that exists, awareness will keep increasing pressure, and pressure will keep driving avoidance. This is not a personal failure. It's a structural mismatch. And once you see that, something important happens. You stop trying to push through awareness. And start asking a different question, not why can't I act? But, from where am I being asked to act? That question is the pivot. Because it leads us to the only thing that actually prevents relapse. Not more insight. Not more discipline. But a new place inside you from which decisions no longer feel dangerous. That's what we build next. Most people think the opposite of fear is confidence. It isn't. The opposite of fear is margin. The margin layer is the internal state where decisions stop being about survival and start being about placement. Not because fear disappears, but because fear no longer runs the process. Margin is space. Space between a stimulus and your reaction. Space between a number and your nervous system. Space between discomfort and collapse. From this layer, money is no longer a threat. It becomes information. Not neutral information, usable information. A number can feel uncomfortable without feeling catastrophic. A decision can feel uncertain without feeling dangerous. That's the difference. When you decide from margin, your body isn't asking, how do I stay safe? It's asking, what does this create? That single shift changes everything. Because now movement doesn't feel like exposure. It feels like allocation. You're no longer bracing. You're placing time, energy, attention, money. Not to avoid pain, but to build capacity. This is why margin is not about having enough money. It's about having enough room. Room to absorb a mistake. Room to recover from a hit. Room to adjust without panic. Two people can earn the same income and live in completely different internal states. One feels trapped. The other feels oriented. The difference isn't discipline. It isn't intelligence. It's margin. From the margin layer, waiting loses its emotional reward. Not because waiting becomes wrong, but because it becomes unnecessary. You don't wait to feel safe. You move to create safety. And because movement now builds space instead of threat, your nervous system stops resisting it. This is why people who reach margin say things like, I'm still uncomfortable, but I can think clearly. I don't love this decision, but I'm not frozen. I don't have certainty, but I have direction. That's not confidence. That's capacity. Margin doesn't eliminate discomfort. It contains it. And contained discomfort feels like effort, not danger. Effort you can sustain. Effort that compounds. Effort that builds leverage instead of eroding it. This is why advice suddenly starts working here. Not because the advice changed, but because you finally have somewhere to apply it from. Threat consumes capacity. Comfort preserves the familiar. Margin creates optionality. And optionality is the real form of safety. Not guarantees. Not predictability. Not control. Options. The ability to choose again. The ability to recover. The ability to move without everything being on the line. This is the layer most adults never reach because no one teaches them that decisions can come from anywhere else. They think the only choices are fear or comfort. Survive or soothe. Margin is the third option. And once you've decided from margin even once, your body remembers the difference. You can feel it. The numbers don't disappear, but they stop feeling like verdicts. The uncertainty doesn't vanish, but it stops feeling like danger. And waiting stops feeling wise. Not because you're rushing, but because you finally have somewhere to stand. This is where avoidance breaks. Not through force. Not through discipline. Not through motivation. Through repositioning. You didn't become braver. You became better resourced. That's the shift. And once decisions consistently come from margin, relapse stops being a constant threat. Because you're no longer choosing between panic and paralysis. You're choosing direction. This is the final layer. And from here, action stops feeling like self-betrayal and starts feeling necessary. Not urgent. Not dramatic. Just honest. That's how the cycle ends.